Thank you for watching this video from the Center for European Studies at Carleton University. This event was organized by the Center for European Studies and Canada-Europe Transatlantic Dialogue, and supported by Carleton University and by grants from the European Union and Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada. The views expressed in this video are solely those of the presenter and do not reflect the views of the European Union, Center for European Studies, and Carleton University.
I would say that the success of European renewable energy, renewable power, is to a large extent due to the fact that the European Commission was unable to prevent the more successful models. It is becoming more successful now, also because member states are more accepting of that or want to go this way on their own. Before I enter into this discussion, what I wanted to do is to go to the quintessence more quickly than given the time constraints. I would like to present the two models which were essential for the support of renewable power in Europe over the last decade and a half at least. There's a feed-in tariff launched by Denmark and Germany essentially, and with a very specific formulation in the German case. It was fought by the Commission most of the time, from the 1990s on. Particularly irritating to the Commission was then the Renewable Energy Act of 2000, which declared its intention to organize a full-scale transition to renewable power, 100%. It was not in the Act yet, but it was clear it was granting priority to renewable power. It had wanted to achieve the goal 50% by 2050 then. And nuclear and fossil power were simply supposed to be residual, to cover the residual load. To achieve this goal, the Act did a variety of things. It provided, its intention was to create demand, a steady demand for renewable power equipment, and by guaranteeing a tariff that was paying enough, modest profit, but sufficient, by introducing stability so there would be a continuous demand for this, and by an obligation on utilities to accept all renewable power tendered to them, all renewable power, and to grant it priority access to the grid. This was expected to lead to the creation of a renewable power equipment industry, wind turbines, solar panels, etc. And this was the key to solve the problem in the German view, in the view of the legislators in this case. They thought that the technological learning that would result from creating a renewable power industry would then bring down the prices and make the diffusion of renewable power possible on a large scale. The Act was hugely successful in terms of reaching its goals. It was very popular with the public, but it was strongly opposed by incumbents, not surprisingly. Incumbents fought the Act from the beginning, and the predecessor Act, and it was also unpopular with conservative forces from business, essentially, and some other political elements that I won't go into in detail. Now, this is one way, the feed-in tariff way, and the countries that had the first high growth in the EU were all Denmark, Germany, Spain, feed-in countries, or something very similar in the case of Spain. Now, the model that the European Commission proposed was a quota certificate scheme. Just very briefly, incumbents, generators, are obligated to carry a growing share of renewable power in their portfolio. They have to submit certificates for that. They can buy the certificates. They don't have to do the generations themselves, but they can buy the certificate. And the certificates can be traded separately from the physical electricity. This was expected to lead to more competition internationally also, so that Britain could, for example, buy the certificates and have the power generated and consumed in Germany or in Greece, for that matter, and with no flows going there. And this competition between incumbents was supposed then to bring down the price of certificates and lower the price of renewable power. And this in turn, so the idea of the proponents, would lead to a dynamic expansion of renewable power. The practical outcome of this policy we can see with we could see anyhow in the United Kingdom. It had some of the highest prices for renewable power, some of the lowest deployment rates, the highest profits for project operators, almost no contribution to technological development until very recently. So it has all the worst case things. This was what the EU supported until 2013. So I think that's the most interesting feature of what I'm going to say. I wanted to say now in detail. Now, why was Europe successful? I would add a little bit more. I think there was a strong feeling that renewable power would address a variety of problems: import dependence, reliance on nuclear, climate change, regional policy, industrial policy. And this was even accepted this was also not just accepted, this was a concern for EU institutions. So this part was, in this respect, the EU and the Commission supported renewable power. Then I think the second important feature was the existence of a few pioneer countries, Denmark, Germany, and Spain, that responded to political pressures from civil society in supporting renewable power. It's interesting, in Denmark it was a revolt from the parliament, which against the declared will of the government, introduced the feed-in tariff. It was the same story in Germany several times over. Economic affairs ministries think in neoclassical terms and don't like feed-in tariffs. And for the same reason they like certificates. And that was true even in those two countries that I just mentioned. But the parliament prevailed over the government in those situations in their rebellion. What feed-in tariffs do is make it possible for new entrants to get into the power business, and that makes a big difference because it creates competition, it creates pressure on the incumbents, and it takes strong political support to take such a measure, because the incumbents are usually very powerful, very capital-intensive, big firms who are not easily avoided in politics, and nobody wants them. No politician will want them normally as their adversary. So this was the second feature. The third feature was that the European Commission failed to get its will. The majority of the Commission was committed to neoliberal thinking, which had inspired electricity liberalization, and they wanted to do something compatible with liberalization of electricity. And they thought that the best idea was to revitalize the competition among incumbents. They put it almost in those terms in the working paper. They did not like the idea of motivating new entrants for whatever reason. To kill the feed-in tariff schemes, the Commission usually invoked state aid and internal market rules, but as I said, it was unsuccessful in doing so, and it was unsuccessful when it went beyond that and wanted to formulate directives, renewable power directives, which carried those prohibitions. The conflict started in the predecessor law to the Renewable Energy Act in the 1990s. The Commission then joined a case, we heard of it yesterday, you heard of it yesterday, Preußen Elektra versus Schleswig. In that case, one of the questions at stake was whether the German feed-in law of 1990 was state aid, or violated state aid rules of the European Union, or violated internal market principles of the European Union. The Commission was sure that it would and was arguing this case before the court, and the court turned it down. The next attempt to get rid of feed-in tariffs was in drafting the first directive on renewable power of 2001. Christos Papoutsis was Energy Commissioner, and he made it clear that he would not back down on this issue. He would insist on banning feed-in tariffs, and he would insist on quotas. The Commission had to resign then, not because of this issue, but because of another issue involving corruption. His successor, De Palacio, first tried the same approach and then became more pragmatic and reformulated the directive in such a way that it allowed both feed-in tariffs and quota systems, and other systems for that matter, but these were the two main systems anyhow. But there was a clause that said that that all these schemes, whichever way they were called, would have to respect state aid rules and internal market rules, which was a way of introducing by the back door the same argument as in the case of the court, because the court case was not decided yet, the Preußen-Elektra case. Then the directive was passed in this way with the vague hope that feed-in tariffs might be killed anyhow, but the court then did not maintain the commission, and so the first directive actually encouraged feed-in tariffs. Paradoxical result, that was not the intention. It encouraged also quota systems, but only 5 countries opted for quota systems out of the members of the EU. There was another court proceeding, by the way, still before the Preußen-Elektra case was decided. When the Renewable Energy Act of 2000 was passed, the Commission immediately filed a lawsuit against Germany for violation of these provisions, as I mentioned. Then the next attempt came with the formulation of the second directive in 2007 to 2009. Britain argued, the Commissioner Piebalgs was supportive of maintaining an open field with feed-in tariffs, quota systems, etc., all allowed. By that time, a Commission study had shown that feed-in tariffs were superior in every respect with regard to wind energy. This was what the study was about. It was superior in every respect. It had lower prices, higher deployment, and some other indicators. And so Piebalgs said there's no reason why we should ban feed-in tariffs now. They seem to work. He didn't say they work better, which the study also showed, so we might ban quota systems, but that would have been difficult anyhow. But there was an attempt then during the legal legislation process by the United Kingdom to reintroduce, or maybe to kill feed-in tariffs. I'm not quite sure how much they were aware of what they were doing, but I assume they knew, by introducing trading flexibility. The United Kingdom was concerned that small countries such as Malta, Cyprus, Austria, and the United Kingdom, I repeat, and the United Kingdom, might be unable to fulfill their quota, the binding quota of the second directive, and that for this reason they should have the possibility of benefiting from trade flexibility, meaning that they could buy certificates instead of constructing plants themselves. And it turned out that this would have killed feed-in tariffs because you can't make exceptions from that. It's too complicated to explain now. It would take me a few minutes, and I don't have time, but I can expand on it. In any case, the renewable energy lobby discovered this flaw and confronted Piebalgs with it, and Piebalgs granted them a hearing before the proposal actually went to Parliament, and eventually Piebalgs dropped this proposal, this part. The trading flexibility was eliminated again, and what was introduced was another kind of flexibility, and it was introduced by a coalition from Parliament and the Council. It's called non-trading flexibility, because non-trading flexibility can't ruin the next attempt came by Energy Commissioner Oettinger, and I could not find, when I was preparing this, I remember when he did that, but I didn't remember the date. It was either in winter 2012 or 2013. I think it was 2013. He tried to change the Renewable Energy Directive, the current one, which is supposed to run until 2020, and it contains a vague clause. And he wanted to make use of that clause and announces his intention in the Council, and the Council turned him down. Now, in 2013, the Commission then formulated state aid guidelines for state aid to energy and environment. And these guidelines contain a ban of feed-in tariffs, except for the very small installations. It became law in summer of 2014. Well, it didn't become law. The guidelines have a very special legal status. They are only declarations on what the Commission intends to do if a case should present itself before the Commission. So you can't sue them. You can't claim this. You can't argue that this is illegal because it's not a law. Anyhow, the state aid guidelines have been challenged in legal terms by the European Renewable Energy Foundation, and maybe I'm not sure what's going to be the outcome of this. But in any case, the point is that now there's no massive force in the Council or in Parliament to get the Commission to take this back. Because Germany is no longer on this line. And Germany and Spain and some other countries, but Germany and Spain are essentially, in the past, the countries that protected the feed-in tariff. Now, things have changed since that time, since the days of 2000, and we heard that also yesterday. Now we have several countries where the governments argue that renewable power deployment went too far, it went too fast, it is too expensive, it over-supports, and it's necessary to control this, to get control again over this growth, or even to stop it. This involves not just old opponents of renewable power, such as Poland and Czechoslovakia and the Czech Republic, and Slovakia and Hungary, but the first two are more important. But also the German government, which in 2012 made a shift on the Renewable Energy Act. One could say started in 2009, but because of Fukushima, this was stopped again. And it also involves the United Kingdom. Now, in the case of Germany, this really means only a slowdown of the pace. The pace of growth had accelerated the whole time, and is still accelerating, as a matter of fact, because now is the last occasion to build wind power plants under the old law, probably. In Germany, this is going to be moderated and reduced to a slower speed. In the United Kingdom, if Cameron has his way, it will be more or less cancelled, because Cameron believes in nuclear power. That it is obviously nuclear power does not seem to be cheap, not seem to be expensive, and the electricity market reform in Britain has served mainly this purpose, to allow nuclear power again. It's difficult to believe, because over the last 5 years, there has been a tremendous success since the British introduced the feed-in tariff and reformed the renewables obligation, so it looks like a feed-in tariff. It operates like a feed-in tariff almost. It has been tremendously successful. It tripled their installations, or their output, in fact. But during this, when Cameron came to power, he started the electricity market reform and and announced that the new renewable obligation, the reformed renewable obligation, will be phased out 2016. The feed-in tariff will probably be phased out 2016 also, and in any case, there's a reduction of the solar compensation by about 70%, by a cut of about 70–80% from here until next year. This is still under discussion. Now, the reasons why, all I can say is that the reasons that are usually invoked, I mean, these governments have to some extent not changed their minds, but those that are in power now, have never liked renewables, and now they have a chance to act on it. Oh, I forgot to mention the European Commission, Oettinger, where the criticism of renewable energy. Oettinger, of course, is the person who is partly responsible for the 27% target, reducing the target. He was quoted as saying that Europe alone cannot save the world from climate change. And Europe might become deindustrialized if it goes too far, and this is outrageously expensive. He was ready to put together his own statistics, apparently, and withdrew them when his staff came up with the normal statistics, which showed that it wasn't so bad. So it's really quite folksy in a way, what we see there. What I can say is that the reasons that are usually given are not very persuasive. The argument is that renewables don't need support because they're already competitive. They are, in many respects they are, but not in a warped playing field where coal is not penalized at all, or at €5 per ton of carbon for its external costs. The estimated cost of carbon, according to recent sources, is €80. 5 or 6 are actually the external cost, the internalized cost. So it's just exotic how far it is. There's a claim that this leads to high consumer support, but it forgets about the merit order effects. renewable energy has brought down the cost of power at the electricity exchange, and this is never taken into account in those calculations. The risks to deindustrialization, I think, are not very plausible, and especially if one thinks that industry benefits from the low cost of power at the power exchange, which is in part due to renewable power growth. There's supposed to be the disruption of grid security. All I can say is that in Germany, the grid security has achieved ever higher levels over the last years, along with the growth of renewable power. Maybe has nothing to do with renewable power, but it certainly hasn't suffered from it. And I think there's one weighty reason that is true, and that's the suffering from electricity incumbents that I just mentioned. They were always against renewable power, not all of them, but in the German case, very clearly all of them. And they do suffer, and they may actually be in their phase-out phase. They are certainly in decline, and maybe they will not survive. I'm not sure they survive, but the question is, should they? If they are unable to modernize their structures, and they failed to do so, then there is no place for them. Half a minute, just a couple sentences. The incumbents in Germany have suffered losses in the tens of billions due to their capacity acquisitions that didn't work out, and they built extra capacity when none was needed in huge terms. This biggest wave of coal power construction since the energy crisis. So they did wrong managerial decisions, and that's what they suffer from in big style. Then they also suffer from renewable power because that's taking away their lucrative markets. Okay, that's competition. So I will end with this. Thank you.